This episode is sponsored by FusionAuth.
So as I continue my journey of building and deploying a production service onto Kubernetes, let's start at the very beginning. What is Kubernetes? Well, it can be pronounced a whole bunch of ways to start, including Kubernetes, 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 Kates, K8S, Kubernetes, 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 Kubernandos, Kuberkitties, Kubernetes, Kubernutes, Kubernetes, Kubernetics, Klubernetes, and Cumberbatch. I'm just going to call it Kubernetes from the original Greek name of the god of spending money on cloud services. But what is it? Well, I have some notes on this. According to them, Kubernetes is an over-engineered solution that's largely in search of problems that are best solved via other methods. Oh, sorry, I must be taking this seriously. Cool. Kubernetes is a Russian psyop that, no, not the one that I mean to read. Sorry. Cool, try it again. Kubernetes is so easy to use that a company devoted solely to troubleshooting issues with it has raised $67 million. That one's actually true, but we'll try it again for the last time here. In all seriousness, Kubernetes is an open source system for managing containerized applications in production environments. As I mentioned, I'm using it for the first time in deploying a new production service. Before I get too far into the depths of Kubernetes, I wanted to review how we got here, what problems it solves, and what kinds of problems it's created for us. To begin, we have to start by going back in time. Pull out your boogie shoes because we're discoing back to the 1970s. It was then that IBM introduced logical partitions. LPARs divided mainframes into subsets that each ran their own instance of the operating system and got a fraction of the mainframe's resources. In other words, containers. IBM stayed in the 1970s, at least culturally, but this concept didn't. Virtual machines, BSD jails, Linux cheroots, and other similar technologies proliferated. Now, pull on your Uggs because we're fast forwarding to 2012. In those days, developers spent way too much time saying things like, well, it works on my machine, I'm going home. And then grumpy ops people, of which I was one, would snap back with, well then, back up your email, Skippy, because your laptop's going to production then. I wish I was kidding when I say that one of the biggest problems in tech was how to make your MacBook Pro look like a Linux web server. These were simpler times. I regret having that as my biggest problem. Around then, a company named at the time .cloud released this interesting open source project that they called Docker. Docker created an underrating, streamlined user experience that just got out of the developer's way. When an application looked like it was in a fit state to ship, developers could just pass that container to their ops folks, and then ops could blindly deploy it to production. This application would always be on the same version of code. It would immutably be the same thing along with all of its runtime dependencies and libraries, all packaged up in the form of a container that could basically be shipped anywhere. In short, Docker fixed a whole mess of problems from the developer's perspective. It also opened up a pile of new problems for the ops folks who ran containerized applications in production, also known as in anger. Among the many products and projects to create an ops solution was a contender from, who else? Google. Google had already been doing something very similar to manage workloads internally with their own cluster manager that they call Borg. It really feels like Borg's engineers looked around and then asked themselves, if we could create Borg all over again without relying on internal Google infrastructure things, how would we do it? And the answer was Kubernetes. The name was a nod to the ancient Greek word for helmsman, if the nerds in Google's marketing department who named it are in fact to be believed. Whether they are or not, I'll leave that one to the philosophers. In any case, Kubernetes steered its way pretty quickly into the lead. By the end of 2017, Kubernetes was so predominant that its competitors embraced it natively. VMware adopted it over its own Cloud Foundry. Docker stopped pushing Docker Swarm as the better solution. Mesosphere pivoted so hard from Mesos to Kubernetes that they renamed the entire company D2IQ, presumably after the founder's favorite droid from Star Wars. Cynicism and snark aside, Kubernetes provides some very real value to its adopters. If a hardware node crashes or has a failing disk array, Kubernetes can seamlessly route around it. If a container stops responding, Kubernetes can replace it automatically. Kubernetes can effectively play a game of Tetris to get various workloads packed into fewer servers so their resources don't go unused. In fact, Kelsey Hightower at Google once did exactly that for real by playing a game of Tetris during a keynote to demonstrate this. And of course, Kubernetes has become the lingua franca of multi-cloud, which is a rant for another day. Every application needs authentication, presumably, but just like deciding to buy a car rather than create your own, there are some things where it's safer not to build it yourself from spare parts. Auth is one of them. In fact, I dare say that doing that with Auth would be awful. FusionAuth is authentication built for developers by developers. They know how to put developers in the driver's seat, but also how to keep them out of the pilot's seat because everyone flying their own helicopter is both insane and terrifying. What's cool about FusionAuth is that you can host it yourself anywhere you want, or if you're not into that, they will host it for you in a private, dedicated instance in the cloud instead of a shared service. They have a free version that has no limit on volume, and thousands of applications depend on it today. They know Auth, they're not zeros, if you know what I'm putting down. So before you build it or get stuck with an expensive alternative, check them out at snark.cloud/fusion. Check them out at snark.cloud/FusionAuth. They're not awful. Every current and aspiring cloud provider today supports Kubernetes on its platform. But Kubernetes has its drawbacks and then some. Remember that Kubernetes did come out of Google and as such was designed to solve Google scale problems that smaller shops may or may not have. The first and most obvious challenge is how overwhelmingly complex Kubernetes is. Once you have an application that runs in Kubernetes, you need to dramatically uplift your entire story about telemetry. The old days of log into the Linux box and check what it's doing simply doesn't work when the container you're trying to diagnose stopped existing 20 minutes before you knew there was a problem. You have a bunch of applications running inside of a Kubernetes cluster, they need to be able to find one another and talk to one another coherently. The whole challenge of getting code changes from developer laptops into production via continuous build, continuous delivery, whatever we're calling it this week, has also gotten far more complex. And of course, the cascade failure model that takes down entire fleets of servers when one crashes and that increases the load on the rest and the next one crashes and so on and so forth. That's a lot more damaging now than it used to be. And countless more problems than this still exist to ensnare the unwary. So many of these infrastructure issues are precisely the kinds of things that I pay a cloud provider like AWS or Google Cloud to handle for me. Perhaps most overwhelmingly, it seems like Kubernetes is catnip for engineers who thrive on being clever. And by clever, I mean unnecessarily complicated. When something like Kubernetes breaks, it can be extraordinarily tricky to find out exactly where to go to fix it. And that brings us to the present day, where I still have no real clue how to navigate the murky waters of Kubernetes when running it with an eye toward production. Helmsman is more like hellish, man, right? Whatever the hell Kubernetes is, I just know that I've got zero problem admitting that I'm in way over my head with it, and I'm shrieking for help. More to come on this particular adventure.